to dive a little bit deeper, you talk about teaching for transformation isn't what we think it is. You said that. So what is it then? What is transformational teaching, and what keeps youth pastors from doing it well?
Yeah. So I have a lot to say about this, Paul, but the bullet note
Please,
version,
please do. Please do.
the bullet note version is transformational teaching is teaching in a way that brings about engagement both inside and outside the room. And so it typically is not one-way transmission, which is how most youth pastors think they ought to teach. And so that, like, how we ought to teach comes from a couple different places. So in the book, we talk about this idea of ministry models. And so you have a model in your head of what youth group is supposed to look like. Sometimes that model comes from Bible college. Sometimes it comes from seminary and a preaching class. Sometimes people don't have either one of those, and it comes from the model that you grew up with in your own youth ministry. But those models are not actually, they're not built on what even the latest research in academics is telling us about the best way to teach. So we need to think through not just what we can learn from academia, but also what we can learn from Jesus. So there has been, I think, a strain away from looking at how Jesus actually taught in the Gospels.
Wait,
And
you
when you
don't
go,
mean I don't have to go to college to learn how to
oh my
transformational
gosh,
teach?
yes. Yes, 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 Paul. Again, this might be a news flash or it might not, but let's look at scripture. And when you go to the Gospels, how do you see Jesus teaching? You see Jesus teaching by walking alongside his people, right? By modeling growth, by cultivating trust, by doing these other elements of the Faith Beyond Youth Group compass. But you also see Jesus equipping his disciples by actually teaching through questions. So we at FYI have started saying a lot, don't make a statement when you can ask a question. So like one of the basic things that you can do to teach for transformation is to stop talking and ask questions. So we can actually teach through questions. I think there's this fear that if I stop, that they're not going to have the right answer. And some do in your context. But there is this sense in scripture that Jesus always taught by asking questions, and Jesus taught by telling stories. And that element of kids will remember our stories because they care about us, right? So tell the story, teach like Jesus did, tell a modern day parable. And another element there that I think is really important, Paul, is the sense of giving our authority away. So going back to my story of my own young people, one of the things they told me was, we want to teach. And I looked at them and went, you can't teach. You don't know how to teach. I know how to teach. And they were like, well, then you teach us how to teach, right? But in scripture, again, like we see Jesus commission his disciples, not just once, but multiple times. He sends them out in twos. He's constantly telling them to go out. Matthew 28, of course, the Great Commission. He shares his authority with his disciples. And so we need to do that same thing. And sometimes that looks like formal student leadership teams, but sometimes that looks like inviting a young person to come and to share about something that they're really interested in. I had this kid once, Paul, his name's Connor, and he loved geography, like loved geography. And so we were on a mission trip once, and he was like, Jen, I think we should do a week on biblical geography. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, I want to know where Jesus went in like real terms. Like, I want to plot it on a map. And I was like, okay, do you think anybody else is going to care about this? And he was like, yeah, I think people are going to care about this. And so I was like, great, Connor, how about you lead this conversation? And so I walked alongside of Connor as he actually went through and looked at some scriptural stories and plotted it out. And he gave this, I won't say a talk because it was a conversation. He led a conversation about why Jesus's actual place and geographic location mattered to the story. And the kids were super engaged because it was their friend leading the conversation, right? And
Yeah.
Connor walked away with a newfound understanding of why this mattered and how Jesus's geography shaped Jesus's identity and how it shaped his ministry. And those kinds of things that, like, had I stood up and said that, everybody would have had my exact reaction, right? Of like, I don't care about this. But when it was another kid who was leading the conversation, it creates a different environment for young people to engage in.